Greetings and peace, brothers and sisters. I'm Brother Naba'a Muhammad, Editor-in-Chief of the Final Call newspaper, published by the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We really thank you for tuning in to this Final Call conversation today. Very interesting, very important one. And we got a great brother, great guest to talk about this important subject of the death penalty and its imminence for at least 4 people. There was one brother who was executed literally last night. So we're blessed to have Brother Aaron Greene with us, and Aaron has been working on this issue. Aaron, peace, glad to have you. We listed you on the flyer as part of the Black Alliance for Peace, but we know there's additional work that you do that's also connected with this particular work against the death penalty. Can you talk a little bit about what that work is, and maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you got involved?
Yeah, Brother Naba, well, first, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the Final Call and everyone that is watching. This is an important issue, so thank you all for lifting this up. My name is Aaron Greene. I'm from Orangeburg, South Carolina. As you mentioned, I'm a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, where I serve on the Africa team. I'm also a committee member for the Southern Human Rights Organizers Conference, biannual convening that was founded by attorney and revolutionary Dribble Hill. I also am a coordinator for the JLS Right to Vote movement, which came out of the National Prison Strike. JLS, Jailhouse Lawyer Speaks, is a prisoner-led movement where out of the National Prison Strike, they came out with 10 demands to restructure and change and abolish that system that is oppressed, continues to oppress many people across this country. And lastly, I am a member of the Mississippi Workers Center for Human Rights, based in Greenville, Mississippi, where we focus on the conditions of Black workers, the sufferers, those that suffer under the helm of the U.S. Structure that does not, put the elements of workers first. And more importantly, we're engaged in a class struggle because we understand that even when we are fighting, we have to understand that there's a class analysis to put those that are most oppressed first. And I would say for me, being drawn to this work, drawn to this effort, I'll never forget the Lee County massacre in South Carolina in 2018, where 7 people were killed in Lee County Correctional Facility. It went on for hours before the state intervened. That sparked the national prison strike, which started in South Carolina, expanded across the country, expanded across the globe, where brothers and sisters were fighting for their human rights. And I was drawn to that movement. I wanted to serve any way I could. Ended up connecting with the national coordinator, Amani Suwari, who was doing incredible work across the country, and assisted her on those efforts. So we still lift them up. We're still fighting and lifting up their demands because we understand their demands are the road to liberation and freedom for all people that are caged and chained in this moment. And as I saw and heard the news of the executions that were taking place, there's so much going on this year in 2020. So, it's not a shock that many people didn't know, but the Trump administration has gone on a killing spree. And as you mentioned last night, Brandon Bernard was executed at the age of 40, the youngest person to be executed in 70 years. I was drawn to that because I understand that I believe in international human rights, right? I believe in human dignity. I have a love ethic that loves all our people and centers on those that are suffering the most. When we look at the 13th Amendment, what does it say? Slavery is not over. If you're incarcerated, you are still considered a slave. So the question for us is, what are we doing to free those that are still chained, still enslaved on this, in this evil empire, in this moment now? We're not talking about 200 years ago. We're talking about now. We have people that are still chained, that are facing not the lynching tree itself, but a new form of lynching where they put you on a gurney and they stick a needle in you and take your life away. And what we understand is that disproportionately there's Black people that are facing the death penalty. 4 of the last 5 executions. Brandon Menard was a Black man. 3 other Black men are slated to be executed. And a white woman is slated to be executed. And Alfred Bourgeois is slated to be executed tonight by the Trump administration, unless there is some type of intervention from the Supreme Court or from the president.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we put together this forum so quickly. With the death of this brother, really, literally could be in hours. So we wanted to do whatever we could to raise awareness about him and his life. Let me raise a couple questions that I think people may generally have that I think need to be kind of dealt with. The brother that was executed last night was convicted of a crime. I believe that his victims was a Caucasian couple.
Yeah.
And we know that when Blacks are accused or convicted of murdering whites, they have a bigger chance of getting a death penalty.
Yeah.
But the brother who is facing capital punishment today, the incident involved his daughter, I believe.
Yeah.
And there are others that involved either hurting or killing other Black people. So there are some that would argue, where's the justice for those whose lives were either lost, interrupted, damaged, because there's so much violence that we suffer, not only at the hands of the state, but at the hands of one another. So how do you respond to those kinds of questions?
No, that's a good question. That's a question I've been getting, as you can imagine, the past week or so, and a lot of comments and messages I received. But I center myself on the point that I am anti-death penalty. I don't believe that this U.S. government that has committed genocide on our people for 400 years has the right to determine who lives and dies. And as we understand, we know who the people that have committed genocide and are still hurting our people. They're not facing any form of these systems. It's our people that are facing it. And to lift up also Brandon Menard, let's think about that. 18 years old, was caged for 22 years, brought out at the age of 40 to be executed last night. And looking at his case, right, where this brother was caged for 22 years, I encourage you to look up his videos and hear his story about how he committed his life to helping brothers get their GEDs while he was incarcerated. He wrote letters to youth to deter them from crime. That's what he committed his life towards. And the brother was doing so much powerful work, even though he was in a cell for most of his life, for 23 hours a day. He still found a love ethic for the people. And the thing is, Brandon was not the same man that he was 18 years old. He was growing and becoming and had became something that was so beautiful, being that we needed in this world. We need it in our community. But they took that away after 20 years of his life changing. And that is the reality for most people on death row. They have sat in these cells for 20, 30 years, right? There has to be some form of path to redemption. We don't diminish the lives that have been lost. We don't diminish that. But we understand this system of incarceration and death is not the answer. It has never been the answer. They've been doing it for centuries. And the things are still happening. We look at Brandon Menard's case. Think about this too. He was supposed to be executed at 6 p.m. It did not happen until 9, a little bit after 9. What was going on during that moment? A lot of calls being made. And his lawyers were arguing presenting to the Supreme Court for an extension. Why did they want an extension? The brother faced, in his court case, there were so many flawed elements. There were flawed elements to the point that the prosecution was able to get the jury to convict him and put him on death row by arguing that he would continue to be a nuisance on society if he was ever released. What did they use? They said he was in a gang enhancement laws that are disproportionately impacted our people. Then secondly, they called in a law enforcement official. The law enforcement official said there was a triangle of the gang, the leadership. They said Brandon was at the bottom. Did not impose any form of risk, but the prosecution did not present that evidence. And that was what he was arguing for. He's arguing for a just trial. He never received one. He never received a just trial. That's what he was arguing for. And they denied that and took that away from him.
Yeah.
And also, as we look at some of the other cases, Afro Bourgeois tonight has an intellectual disability. Under the Death Penalty Act, he should not be eligible to be executed. The same thing for Lisa Montgomery. The same thing for Cora Johnson. All of them have intellectual disabilities that the law says they should not be executed. But for some reason, continuously, we have seen this over and over. People that don't even fit under the realm are brought into the death chamber and their lives are taken away. So I just encourage people, as they have these questions about the cases, that they focus on the system itself. The system of the death penalty impacts mostly our people. It's impacting our people. It's always impacted our people because it is an extension of the lynching tree, right? The lynching tree that Ida B. Wells and many others fought against. When she saw her friends like Thomas Moss, 3 black men in 1892, dragged out of a jail by 75 white men, brought to a field and shot, their bodies torn apart and lynched. We have so many of those stories where we can open up the book and see the murder and genocide that has been placed on our people. That has been an extension. That is a direct connection to that type of genocide where people have been placed in courtrooms like Brandon Menard and not given a fair trial. He's been arguing for a fair trial for a long time. And another thing to note is that when Trump was elected, his attorney came out today and revealed that they went to the Obama administration, asked for clemency. And the attorney said they were laughed out of the room. So a lot of these people, it's not just this administration, it's other administrations that have been complacent when these cases have been brought for year after year. And they did not use their power to free these people. Brandon, 40 years old, 18 since he's been on death row. The brother deserved better. He deserved to be alive in this moment. I believe his legacy will live on, but it is painful to realize that his life was taken by this evil empire.
Yeah, you know, the one of the other things, of course, is we talk about the disproportionality when it comes to being on death. Much higher likelihood. I don't know exactly the numbers, but if we're not, I know that in Illinois, for example, before there was a moratorium, the majority of death row inmates were black people. In a state with the history of police abuses and outright police torture, in Chicago, outright torture, not hyperbole. So with these cases, and you look at the history of the U.S., you look at research that has found that the death penalty itself is arbitrary. You have had numerous instances where people literally have been in instances where their attorneys have literally fallen asleep during their death penalty. You've had instances when when blacks were struck from juries illegally. So I think there's a lot about the operation of the process that our people need to understand beyond just the feeling of someone should pay.
Mm.
I think the other thing is both international and domestic law, where you are not supposed to treat those who have intellectual difficulty or those who have some type of mental lack of development. They should not be put to death. Death is seen as inhumane and actually against the human rights um, laws, along with the targeting of juveniles. And some say that even those who are convicted as juveniles should not be executed. Um, what are some of the things that you think people need to understand related to these cases? And then I want to go back to the Trump administration and what they have done with the death penalty.
Yeah. So what people have to understand, I think I've already broken down Brandon's case. So I'll lift up the other cases specifically, even considering Lisa Montgomery. She would be the first woman to be executed in 70 years. Now, Lisa, her family has always lifted up, over the years that she has faced a lot of abuse when she was young. In her home, she was raped, she was abused, and through that, it produced a lot of trauma and led to a lot of mental issues that she faced before eventually, the crime that she was convicted of. But the issue is that a lot of those instances that the family knew and friends and others that brought to the forefront were not presented in the courtroom, right? So that's something, and that's a really good point that you bring up, because a lot of these cases are not clear cut, right? It's not where someone comes in and they're facing the prosecution and they're able to argue everything they want. No, it depends on are they able to afford the best legal counsel? In most cases, the criminal justice system, people that are incarcerated are lower class, working class. So they're not necessarily getting the best legal team that's going to bring in all the evidence that needs to be presented. And that's why now you have, they're appealing to the Supreme Court to finally get a fair trial. Looking at like Brandon's case, you had some of the top lawyers in the country last night joining his case, within the last hour or so. But the reality is the Supreme Court, we understand what that functioning represents, right? We understand the Dred Scott decision when they said that a black man has no right, that a white man is to respect. And we are still living in that system, right? And we pass forward to Corey Johnson, who's been on death row since 1993. He's one of the longest serving people on death row in the country. He's been on there almost 28 years. And again, he has an intellectual disability. That is what his lawyers now are appealing, asking for relief under the Death Penalty Act. But again, that they're at the mercy of the Supreme Court. And the question is, right, we understand how the Supreme Court votes, and we understand what has happened with the Supreme Court over the last year or so, that you're not going to necessarily get relief from there. Even last night, you had dissenting, but the only person that wrote a dissenting opinion was Justice Sotomayor, who drew out why Brendan Menard should not be executed in a very 6-page, eloquent way. But still, his life was taken. right? And then we also look at Brother Higgs, who was not the trigger man. He was an accomplice. The brother that was the trigger man said Brother Higgs was not the trigger man. He admitted it. He said it over and over. He said the brother should not be on death row. But the court argued that he was. And the court argued that he should be placed on death penalty. And Brother Higgs has been pushing and fighting the last few years since being on death row, lifting up his case, trying to get some form of relief. And last, Afro Bourgeois, there is his team filed for relief on the Supreme Court. We're going to see what happens in the next few hours. Citing the Death Penalty Act again, right? This was something, and they broke down a detailed frame of, saying that they actually had, professionals, mental health professionals that have confirmed, some of the top in the country have confirmed that he has an intellectual disability. His teachers and other people that knew him since he was a child, he struggled in school. He had just many different issues that many people have attested to. And this has been now being brought before the Supreme Court. But the reality is the Supreme Court is not necessarily going to vote for justice. It's going to necessarily vote for its framework, right? And you have different views on the Supreme Court that, are not taking humanity at first. They're looking at the law, right? Even Attorney General Barr, they asked him, they said, why are you carrying out these executions? What's the point of you carrying out this? He said, well, it's the law. If somebody wants to change the law, you got to go to Congress and get rid of the death penalty. But as long as it's here, I'm going to follow it. Lack of humanity, lack of care. And what we realized is from 1972 to 2019, there were 3 federal executions. Trump administration is on pace over 13 in a matter of 6 months. Trump is the most ever in a year, any president in U.S. history. He has executed the most people in 2020 than any president in U.S. history in a matter of 6 months. And he strategically placed, I believe, the Black brothers towards the end to send some type of message. This didn't just happen out of coincidence. He is sending a clear message, not just him. It's not just him, but that system of white supremacy is sending a clear message, because the death penalty is a direct formation and creation of white supremacy, right? Mm-hmm. And just to end, think about lynching, right? Lynching was used to intimidate Black people, right? We think about Nat Turner and so many others that were lynched, the way they were lynched, the way they tore his body apart, the way they used to have their bodies hanging for days. We're not far removed from that. It's just a different form of it, but we're not far removed. And that's why I said in my article that the Ku Klux Klan not only wears white robes, carries shotguns, burns crosses, but they wear tailored suits. They wear these fake smiles, and they use these legislative pens to lynch us in a new way. And I thank you so much for lifting up that issue, because it's more that meets the eye with these cases. These are people that all 5 of these people did not receive a fair trial. They were not able to argue everything on their end, even though everything was thrown at them by the prosecution. They were not able to lift up what happened to them. And what we see is that many times people on death row, they were abused when they were young. They faced so much trauma, right? And the reality is you put people in incarceration for 20 years, like Corey Johnson, over 28 years, to drag him out. In 2020, he's been in the cell since 1993, to drag him out in 2020 to execute him. Just inhumane. It doesn't serve a purpose. It's just straight up lynching, murder.
Yeah. Naba'a Muhammad, editor-in-chief of the Final Call, and you are listening to a Final Call conversation with Brother Aaron Greene with the Black Alliance for Peace, as well as the Southern Human Rights organizing conference and also affiliated with the Mississippi Workers Center. Aaron, the research. Research has shown the death penalty is really not a deterrent to people committing crimes, even though this is one of the arguments made. You mentioned law, but there is the decision about how and which laws always to follow or implement. There are laws of evidence. There are laws of a right to adequate counsel, or there are laws about evidence. And very often we see that when it comes to the punishment side, there's great respect for that in the name of law, but very often little respect for the rights of defendants, in particular in capital cases. And like you said, we've seen this systemic and systematic taking of Black lives in this way. So you've got a tool that doesn't deter murder nor crime. You've got a tool that research has shown is arbitrary and racially biased. This is just what the actual facts are. So talk to me a little bit about how the Trump administration got to be such a killer of people. You mentioned Attorney Barr. He made a speech earlier this year that I felt was I believe it was earlier this year, last year, that I felt was one of the most important speeches that was underreported, where he said to attorneys, U.S. attorneys generals from around the country, charge at the maximum level you can, go after people at the maximum level in terms of penalties we can impose. You talked about the number of people the Trump administration has executed. Can you talk a little bit about how and why you think that happened?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So, for about 3 years or such, through the administration, they had followed suit with the Obama administration, which, there was no federal execution at that time. So 17 years, right, where there was no federal execution. They decided, in July of 2019, there was a memo written to the Department of Justice to, bring back, not bring back, but restart. It was never really taken away, but there was a period of time where, for 17 years, where it was paused. They decided to restart it, and it really centers on the element of what we see with the language of the Trump administration, the way they modeled themselves, right? Mm-hmm. I think that when people hear "Make America Great Again," I think sometimes people say, "Oh, that's a new term." That's not new. No, Ronald Reagan was the first president I remember using that. And then you had Bill Clinton using it in front of, during his time of law and order. So all those presidents, right, what do they have in common? Law and order, right? Reagan, law and order. Clinton, law and order, the crime bill. Trump, law and order. And he's been declaring law and order, since he ran for president. As we saw his language of encouraging police brutality, encouraging police to beat up people they arrest. So I think that this is just an extension of that. I think that he is fulfilling his promise to his base to set an element of law and order. Now, what does law and order mean? That's bad news for Black people, because that is directly targeted at us. Law and order is a cry to put us down. Law and order is a white supremacist cry. Law and order is not about justice. It's about showing power. And that is what he and his administration is aimed to do in this moment. They've already carried out the most in U.S. history in a year. They're on pace to carry out 13. And he's the first president since 1890 to carry out a federal execution in a lame duck session. The last president to do that was under the Cleveland administration in 1890, where he called for the execution of an indigenous man. Now Trump is doing it at a level we've never seen before. And as I mentioned before, that there are people that are quiet during this moment that are not innocent bystanders, even considering President-elect Joe Biden, the author of the crime bill, which included the Death Penalty Act, which had 60 new crimes that would make you eligible for the death penalty. That was passed under the Clinton administration. That led to more people potentially being eligible for the death penalty. And another thing I would, as we center this moment and we ask ourselves, why is this not getting as much press? Why is this not being lifted up as much? Because people have made a decision. They made a decision that they're not going to center themselves or go to the valley where the suffering is, or stand with those that are suffering the most oppression. There's a class divide, right? Where people that have access to the White House, have access to the big house, but have no concerns for those that are suffering in the valley. When Dr. King wrote his letter from Birmingham jail, there were over 200,000 people in prison, in federal prison, in all prisons across the country, federal and state. Now there are over 2 million, the highest prison population in the world. So we understand what our enemy is going to do. We're clear on that. So I'm not shocked with what our enemy is doing, because we have a 400-year track record to see that. But what I am shocked by is that there are not enough voices fighting and resisting what is taking place. We had a lynching last night. We have another lynching that's planned for tonight. We have 3 more. You would think that there would be some cry. As Ida B. Wells said, where are our leaders when our race is being burnt, hung, and shot? And I ask the same question today. Where are these leaders that declare Black Lives Matter? Where are these leaders that declare that they care about the humanity of our people? Where are these leaders that you always see them when cameras out, but there are no cameras in prison? There's no money to be made off someone on death row. They're nowhere to be found. But for us that do have a love ethic for all of our people, we have to continue to press forward and lift up this issue. Not only lift it up, but call out the inconsistencies. Call out the discrepancies. And really put people to task and really see what they care about. Because the reality is that the Biden administration, they're coming in. They just had a meeting with the civil rights leaders, I believe yesterday. I didn't hear anything about this being brought up. I heard some other things about jobs and other elements. But what about this? What about this dire moment? Because there's no doubt in my mind, if Ida B. Wells and others that were on the front lines pushing the anti-lynching movement, where they would be standing at this moment, they would be standing with the sufferers, standing in solidarity and crying for justice, crying out for justice, crying out for liberation, and crying out for a stop to this murderous system that has taken so many of our lives and is scheduled on pace to take more.
Yeah, I think and it's really a few things you said that I want to get back to. But where I want to start is a policy choice, not an inevitability, but a choice, a policy decision, a political decision made by a president in the face of years, almost 20 years without anybody being executed at the federal level.
Yeah, 17. Yeah, yeah.
So we've got to understand this was not something that was inevitable. This was a cold, calculated decision.
Yeah.
And it seems with Mr. Trump and with these other folks, when they talk about law and order, that means law and order for the Black people in particular, and anybody else, Native American, Latino, that's dark. It's law and order for us, but never for them. You mentioned Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was running for president, he executed a Black man in Arkansas. And I think that we need to point out the politics. If the Democratic Party ever was any better than the Republicans. If.
Yeah, it's a good if, right?
That's actually a rhetorical if. That ain't a real if.
Yeah.
That's correct. Not with Mr. Clinton. Not with his policies. Dropping bombs in Africa, kicking poor people off of welfare, and not giving them the services and the support that he promised. People talk about the crime bill. The crime bill was not just something that people cried for because of violence. It was a political act. For Mr. Clinton, who was embattled. So we cannot allow that lie to be told that everybody was for it. No. People like Reverend Jesse Jackson were against it. People like Maxine Waters were against it.
Yeah.
I believe the late Ron Dellums was against it. I know that Mr. Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam were against it. Congressman Bobby Scott was against it. So there were many leaders, and I don't think you've ever seen among our people calling solely for punishment at any point. There are always those who call for rehabilitation. There's always those who call for programming, but those things are not even written into many of the laws today. Corrections is not even written into many of these operations at the state level. I'm not sure about the federal, but they even took out the language, even though they never delivered on the language. Now, you can't even argue that as a point because they say you just sit here and we can we can benefit from your labor. We can create a few jobs. You know, I remember when to build a prison was a political death sentence. But now, I don't know if it's so much now, but I know that in the 80s and the 90s, you had these in particular rural white communities bidding for prisons because of jobs and contracting. You mentioned the lack of outcry. These leaders that met with Mr. Biden, did they know about this situation, or did they just miss it? Like, you know, I try to stay informed, but frankly, brother, I'm really embarrassed to say that until you really reached out to me, I really kind of missed it. Certainly didn't know the numbers under the Trump administration. So was it just that somebody missed it, or did they know? And there are other questions that deserve to be asked.
Yeah, so that's a good point. You know, for me, as I lift up that, you know, critiqued about the leaders, it comes after actually reaching out to some, right? One particularly in the meeting, right, where we reached out to the leader of the NAACP. Me and Jaribu Hill, we sent him a letter describing what was occurring. We drew the connection to Ida B. Wells, who was a co-founder of the NAACP. And when she was in the NAACP, she pushed against the lynching. So we made aware in the letter We detailed what was coming. We detailed the issues of the Trump administration. We detailed the 5 different cases, why they shouldn't happen, and just the fact that there was still some time to at least organize some urgent action, because we knew that there would be some form of meeting coming up in Washington, or at least with President-elect Joe Biden, to hold his feet to the fire, to use his platform, and he's going to be the president, right? He's not necessarily in the chair now, but he could have utilized his political cachet to lift up what was occurring in this moment. And when you have these moments of leading a meeting, you would think that after being made aware that something good would have come out of it, at least for all those involved, at least a bit more advocacy, at least a bit more urgent actions, some type of standing in solidarity. Now, we understood that there's a battle where it's not guaranteed that you would have prevented it, but at least to show after you were made aware, and your legacy that's tied to Ida B. Wells and the anti-lynching movement, and the fact that you have access to the White House. If you're not advocating now before he gets in, what are you going to do when you get in there? So should you even be there? That's the question. If you're not willing to lift up the demands of our people that are suffering in the valley, right? Because that's what Brother Fred Hampton, Chairman Fred, we celebrated a few days ago. That's what that brother said. He said, I woke up one day, I realized I was at the mountaintop. And he said, I looked around and my people were not around me. He said, I realized my people were in the valley, the people suffering the most. So I went back down to the valley with my people. And I said I wasn't going back to the mountaintop unless I was holding hands with my people. Now, we have some people in our community that just want to go to the mountaintop by themselves and want to leave our people behind. But you shouldn't have left Brandon Bernard behind when you went into that meeting. You shouldn't have left Corey Johnson behind when you went to that meeting. You shouldn't have left Dustin Higgs behind, Alfred Bourgeois behind, Lisa Montgomery, and so many others that are suffering, not only in the criminal justice system, but just suffering in America under this system. And that is the same critique that Ida B. Wells had of leaders during that time. Is that you go into these meetings looking for jobs for yourself. You go into these meetings looking for high chairs in the White House, not chairs, but high chairs. You're going to these meetings looking for keys to the washroom to the White House because you're not really getting actual access, because you had to actually beg. You had to beg the president. You had to beg Joe Biden for a meeting, even though you put him first the last 2 years. You were knocking on doors, putting all that money towards getting him in office, and once he got it, he didn't answer your calls. He forgot your number. He threw it away because they do that every time. But see, brother, that's why we need the people that really care about, have the love ethic, because we have a tradition of that. We look at some of the meetings back in the 60s with presidents. We had some fiery people in there that really cared about the people. But today we have people that are just focused on their individual climbing status instead about the collective suffering of our people. So there's no question in my mind that I know at least know one person that was aware of it, and I'm sure others were. Because as we shared with one person, I'm sure they shared it with others. But that's the reality, that there is a class divide. I'm going to lift that up one more time because I just want to have us focus on that there's a class divide where, everybody does not necessarily care about Black working class or the Black in prison class, right? That are suffering under these systems. And I just want to lift up, you talked about the crime bill. I want to lift up what our brothers from JLS wrote. These are brothers that are incarcerated. They wrote this quote about the crime bill. The victims of an unfair social system were made the predators, fit to be enslaved for decades. It was unspoken, but everyone that voted for and supported the crime bill knew who and what communities this bill would impact directly. Right. And those are brothers that are still fighting to this day for freedom. And I just want to end my point on this is that, many people ask the question, where are our revolutionaries? Where are our fighters? The reality is a lot of them are in prison. A lot of them are suffering in prison because of what I've seen working with, some of these people, brothers and sisters incarcerated, is that they have a revolutionary fire and a love ethic for all Black people, and they have a clear vision of what liberation and freedom is. So I just encourage, as we need to center more of our movements on their voices, center more of our movements on their demands and their concerns, and not just allowing the elite bourgeoisie class to pretend like they're representing the interests of our people, but in reality, they're only interested in their own self-gain.
Yeah, I want to get to in a couple minutes, Aaron, support for organizing and work and what can be done.
Yeah.
And I think at minimum, we should not stand by.
Yeah.
At a minimum, the minimum we can do is fight.
Yeah.
The minimum. We should not stand by and allow our people to be killed in the Muslim program. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad calls for our people being taken out from under death penalty sentences in the South and in the North, or at state levels. So for the Nation of Islam, this is not a new issue. And we believe deeply in the redemption of our people. Malcolm Little went to prison.
Yeah.
Malcolm X came out. And that's not just a story from yesterday. That's a story from today. And many of those brothers and sisters that were in, that are now out, continue to go back to try to get others out. I wanted to say, because sometimes we can think we cannot change something, but I wanted to point to examples over the years. One, there was a time when there was a heavy support for the death penalty. Yet, a moratorium or end to the death penalty or pausing of the death penalty happened right here in Illinois. Right here. And it spread, I believe, to other states. The commitment to execute Mumia Abu Jamal. At one point, it was seen as almost an inevitability, but because of fighting and organizing, the brother is still alive today, even though they've done horrible things to him. They've denied him medical treatments. So, is there any value to organizing and trying to get these people's lives spared?
Oh, yes, there is value. There is value. And we have to bring back that type of formations. As last night, our brother Ajamu and Jaribu, they shared during the Black Alliance for Peace program, that there was a strong tradition of death penalty action that you lifted up. And we have to get back to that, not only for dismantling the death penalty, but just the prison industrial complex in itself. So as we look at this moment now, Afro-Bourgeois is facing execution tonight in a matter of a few hours. But following his execution, there are 3 more. We're hoping that there's some type of intervention tonight, but that's going to be left up, as I mentioned, to the Supreme Court or the president showing some type of grace. But we have Lisa Montgomery, who's slated to be executed on January 12th. Corey Johnson, slated to be executed on January 14th, 2021. And Dustin Higgs, he is slated to be executed on January 15th. That would be the last federal execution carried out by the Trump administration a few days before the inauguration. And January 15th, as some of you may know, is the birth date of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So he is slated to be executed at that time. So, for instance, Dustin Higgs has a website where I think he played a pivotal role in it. I've been, looking at a lot of language just coming from a first person standpoint. So savedustinhiggs.com. Would encourage you to go to that website to learn more about his case. They have other petitions and ways that you can raise awareness in your community. What's important is that you share what is going on. If you're listening, share it. Organize in your communities, call your elected officials on the federal level, and just press. We have to continue to lift this up every single day to stop these executions. As we've mentioned before, even Brandon Bernard, there's been a lot of outcry after following his execution, but before it, I wish it was that same amount before, because I think we probably could have had some, potential to raise it to a level where it would have been a likelier chance that there would have been some grace shown. So we have 3 more that we can raise that momentum the last, 2 months or such. And deathpenaltyaction.org has been an organization where they have put together comprehensive information about all the cases and ways you can get involved. They have visuals in different states, organizations, and they also have links to, specifically relating to everyone's case. So I believe that there's power in organizing. I believe there's power in lifting up these issues. Even in the time that, with, Brandon and his family, that's what they were doing. They were organizing, trying to get some justice, for Brandon. That's what they spent the last 5, 10, 15 years, just raising awareness about his issues. And what they call for is that for us to join them in this fight. Dustin Higgs on his site, you just see it, everything laid out. He's calling support. They have a link, support now, how you can support, because they're organizing. So the reality is that we have to join them, because if we do not, we're leaving it to the hands, just solely to the hands of our oppressors. And the reality too is that, there is a change of administration coming, and but we should not let up. Have to continue, right? The death penalty should be abolished. There should be legislation filed to get rid of the death penalty, federal death penalty. There also, I would encourage everyone to review the National Prison Strike 10 demands of the 2018 National Prison Strike. These demands were crafted by people that are incarcerated. I don't know if I have time, but I would love to lift them up if I could. They're 10 demands.
We got about 10 minutes. Go ahead. Okay.
The first demand is an immediate improvements to the conditions of prisons and policies that recognize the humanity of imprisoned men and women. Demand number 2, an immediate end to prison slavery. All persons in prisons in any place of detention under United States jurisdiction must be paid the prevailing wage in their state or territory for labor. Number 3, the Prison Litigation Reform Act must be rescinded, allowing imprisoned humans a proper channel to address grievances and violations of their rights. Demand number 4, the Truth in Sentencing Act and the Sentencing Reform Act must be rescinded so that imprisoned humans have a possibility of rehabilitation and parole. No human shall be sentenced to death by incarceration or serve any sentence without the possibility of parole. I want to say that one more time. No human shall be sentenced to death by incarceration or serve any sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 5, an immediate end to racial overcharging, over-sentencing, and parole denials of Black and brown humans. Black humans shall no longer be denied parole because the victim of the crime was white, which is a particular problem in southern states. Demand number 6, an immediate end to racist gang enhancement laws targeting Black and brown humans. Gang enhancement laws, gangs, that type of narrative was used on Brandon Bernard. Demand number 7, no imprisoned humans shall be denied access to rehabilitation programs at their place of detention because of their label as a violent offender. Demand number 8, state prisons must be funded specifically to offer more rehabilitation services. Demand number 9, Pell Grants must be reinstated in all U.S. states and territories. And number 10, the voting rights of all confined citizens serving prison sentences, pretrial detainees, and so-called ex-felons must be counted. Representation is demanded and all voices count. Those are the 10 demands of the National Prison Strike, which came about after the Lee County massacre in Lee County, South Carolina, April 2018.
Good. This is Naba'a Muhammad, editor-in-chief of the Final Call, and you're watching Final Call conversation with Brother Aaron Greene, who was part of the Black Alliance for Peace and Southern Human Rights Organizing Conference and he's also affiliated with the Mississippi Worker Rights Center. And we've got about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to you, and why don't you take us home in terms of anything that you think we need to know. Also, God willing, we're going to be running a piece by Aaron in the copy of the final call that comes out next week. So make sure you get it and retweet and share. Check out our social media on Twitter and Facebook, because this is being tweeted out now. Continue to share and go to the websites that brother mentioned. And Brandon, you've got about 3.5 minutes.
All right. Thank you, brother. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to lift up this issue, and thank you all for standing in solidarity with these families and people that are on death row facing this potential lynching tree. I just want to lift up, as I give my final remarks, I want to say these names: Brandon Bernard, may he rest in peace; Dustin Higgs, Lisa Montgomery, Corey Johnson, Alfred Bourgeois. As we've covered in this program tonight, these people are facing an unjust system that has already taken the life of brother Brandon Bernard on last evening at the age of 40 years old. Spent most of his life incarcerated, spent most of his life 23 hours to a cell. But there was, like, as I mentioned, there was work that he was doing to impact the community. I know his legacy will live on. And as we look at all these cases, right, not given a fair trial, not given justice, facing death, given a death date. But the moment is that we still have time to lift up their names. We still have time to make calls. We still have time to organize. We still have time to do something to show that we are in solidarity with these brothers and sisters. We're in solidarity with their families in this moment. Because it's not just this moment we're fighting for the future. So there are not other young people like 18, like Brandon, that are thrown into cages and having their life stripped away. Because the reality is, it's not just the death penalty that our people suffer from, but some people are just thrown in cages and sentenced for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or life sentences, where they're caged away, thrown away by this government. But the love ethic that we have, understanding that our people should never be thrown away, that there's a path to redemption, and that this system does not solve the issues. When we talk about helping our youth, helping our people, helping people turn away from crime, or helping communities uplift in resources, it's investing in these communities that uplift, not taken away. But so many of our communities have had so many people taken away. Think about the impact Brandon would have continued to have on young people if he was released into the community. If Corey was released into the community, if so many others were released and given an opportunity to have another chance at life. So as I end tonight, I just want to lift up one more time that no one should suffer in this system of slavery that is called the criminal justice system. We have to break every chain that oppresses our people. And more importantly, we have to stand with those that are suffering the most in the valley as they walk and press for a promised land of liberation and freedom for all our people.
Aaron, thank you. We're going to close. But look, find Black Alliance for Peace. Just Google it. They'll come up. Southern Human Rights Organizing Conference. If you go to Twitter, you can find Aaron. If you Google him, you can find him. But brothers and sisters, thank you. Aaron, thank you. We'll stay in touch. Read the final call. and support institutions that support you. Peace. Thank you.
Peace. Peace, brother.